Our presentation is on the principles of sustainable landscape design. Okay, anyway, here we go. My name is Matthew Gaston. I like plants and I like helping people understand them and get entertained along the way and help people create sustainable landscapes by doing consulting and evaluating what they have in place and improving the world around us so that it's safe for us and for the other animals and plants around us. So today we'll be talking about sustainable landscaping. What is sustainable landscaping, you might ask? Well, there's a lot of different things about it. One, it's something that enhances the landscape's microclimates. You'll have different pockets of climate within a landscape, especially if there's different topographies, and you have hills and rivers and things. So sustainable landscaping takes note of those. It increases the biodiversity of the space. You're gonna have a lot of different things in that landscape. Particularly, you might have native things because those will be the most well adapted to your area, and that will attract insects and birds and other animals. So you'll have increased biodiversity, which as a whole is positive and beneficial. You'll get reduced inputs and resource waste. If you have a sustainable landscape, what you're going to have is you're going to have a landscape that doesn't require you to be spraying fertilizer and pesticides on it constantly. You'll save money and time and energy. So this is actually a sustainable landscape is not only the best thing for the environment, it's also the best for your wallet. I'm going to be a salesman right now. And it reduces the waste and it maximizes the reuse of resources. If you have a bunch of wood chips or something, that's going to be then used in your sustainable landscape as a mulch. And it also takes advantage of the idea of not purchasing new materials, but finding those naturally occurring around us and finding new purposes for them. We say reduce, reuse, recycle. And a sustainable landscape inherently reuses materials. Okay, so you might have heard the word xeriscaping. Xeriscaping, which is like dry condition. That's what it means. It's a landscape that is dry condition. Some people say xeroscaping, which is a misunderstanding of the word xeriscaping. It's xeri, like xeric. It's also a synonymous word is a water conservation gardening. In certain parts of the American South and the West, folks will use this terminology to say that, hey, this is a garden that's going to save you water, so you don't have to be watering your lawn all the time. Additionally, there's a trend picking up where people call it green gardening. It's environmentally friendly gardening. This is gardening that's good for the earth. Okay, so yay! The big thing we'll be discussing today, at the core of it, is that there's 7 key principles for sustainable landscaping. And we'll begin with the big one, which is the very first thing you do when you have a landscape is you need to plan it out and design it. What is your goal? What is your objective? Actually, before you do anything in life, you should define your objective. What do you want out of something? I wake up every day and I say, well, what do I want of the day? And I check in with my body and I say, well, I feel like I want to go for a run, and I want to maybe lift some weights, and I want to have a nice meal, and I want to water my plants. And so that's what you might do in your daily life. You do the same thing with your garden. You have to determine what you want. So the very first thing you have to do is plan it out. If you don't have a plan, you're wasting time and potentially wasting resources. When I was a kid, I wanted to design my backyard. And so there's a term called landscape view. So if you were a bird flying over a yard or a piece of land and looked directly down, that's called landscape view. And I went into Microsoft Word as a kid, and I mapped out our house. So this big gray thing at the bottom is our house and our patio, and we had these bushes in the back. And so I put red for these red tip bushes, and then we had this leucophyllum. It was just sage and then little trees. And so this is what I had made. And there's like a shed, and this is where the trash and recycling was. My little rosemary plant is like, well, I want to put cool plants back here. So I printed a bunch of these out and I started drawing different designs. And I wanted to have hummingbirds and butterflies because I would sit and I'd look out the window and I wanted to see all the animals. And so you can create the foundational baseline of your garden and try and do it to scale. So measure everything out. The iPhone has an application called Measure, which is really useful. I use that whenever I'm measuring things in the landscape. And nowadays it's really easy to do it. Something more professional might look like this. So this is a landscape design that is very well done, very robust, and it is indeed in plan view. You can see it's on graph paper, so you have everything is appropriately to scale. The sidewalks are appropriately long. Each of these plants is represented by shape with different colors and textures, and they're mapped out on the bottom. You can see that this is a really intense landscape. It's pretty small, but it has like 35 plants in it, and they've grouped them by trees, shrubs, perennials, and cacti and succulents. This is just an easy way to do it. And so the big trees, here on the left, there's this big tree that creates a canopy, and there's things underneath. And so you can kind of see that's through there. Now, this is the professionals' work at creating a sustainable landscape. And they use a software to do this. You can do it by hand. There's plenty of different ways to do it. We will be talking about some of the key elements of design right now. But one of the things to note is that when we talk about sustainable landscapes, a big thing is that people always want to have pollinators because they like the idea of vibrancy and life and having movement in the space. And the key for doing that is if you have plants that are really popular with a particular like butterfly or hummingbird or something, plant at least 3 of them next to each other. So in Texas, there's a plant called Turk's Cap. And so Turk's Cap, it has these big, well, they're actually not big. It has vibrant red flowers that hummingbirds love. And the plant will be full of hummingbirds. The thing is that if you plant them all next to each other, it makes this big, large mass of a plant that's easier for the pollinators to come and find, and then it creates a bigger wow factor too. So the very first element of a design, the principle of design, is balance. So making sure that the whole space itself is in equilibrium. If you have like an axis, you can walk down a path and feel like, oh, this left side of the path feels so full and the right side feels empty. So then it's lacking balance. It's when you have a visual space and all of the entities in that space feel appropriate. There's symmetrical balance, which is where everything is a mirror image. So in this picture here, the bench creates the plane of symmetry and everything is repeated. One of the downsides to this particular approach is that if there's a disease that wipes out this one tree, but that one is there, then you have a lack of balance, and then you replant that, but it'll be smaller. And so I actually like asymmetrical balance more. If I'm playing Minecraft, I know the tree won't die, and I want symmetrical balance, but if I'm doing this in real life, asymmetrical balance is good too. And so this is where you create appropriate equilibrium within the visual plane and what you see, but it's not a mirror image of each other, so that if something were to die after 5 years due to a disease or a pest, then it doesn't look so like off. Now you can see that the plane here, or the point of equilibrium, the middle of this fulcrum would be the bench, and the left and right are supposed to balance each other. One of the things that's worth noting is that you can have different textures and colors creating different weights in the scale of balance. So over here, dark colors weigh more than light colors. So important features to acknowledge about the plants are the textures, so how big the leaves are, how small the leaves are, how dense the leaves are, the color of the plant. If the plant produces big flower stems at a certain season, that become a large factor in the overall texture. So the darker colors weigh more in your balancing, and denser branches weigh more than those loose ones. And then lastly, you might actually have some really nice shrubs that are all packed closely together that are low, that actually create the same kind of visual space filling as a tree. The next component is proportion. So all of these apply to Terraria and Minecraft and your actual landscape outside. But when you're designing something, you want to identify proportion. So this is understanding the scale of things. Are the trees too big? Are they too small? Does it make everything feel appropriately the size that you want to go for in a design? So here in this picture, the house looks pretty big and the trees look kind of small. The trees in this section are relatively small. The bushes look kind of small, so it makes the house look really big. Maybe that's what you want. In this one here, we have big trees and big bushes, and the house, relative to the other things, is relatively small, and it feels secluded and clustered away. The house might be actually quite big, but it appears small due to scale. And then lastly, this is what we would call like the standard American perspective as to what appropriate proportion would be for a landscape. The idea was like you might have bushes that go 1/3 to 2/3 height to the roof. You have trees that might be 2 to 3 times taller than the house, and it gives a different type of proportion. So it's all about scale and kind of creating the feel you want. In a newly planted suburban landscape, it'll often feel like the one on the left. All the trees are small, it'll be super sunny, and it'll feel maybe fresh and new, but in the one on the top right, it's like, oh, this might feel like an old neighborhood because the trees have grown really big. I know lots of neighborhoods I've been in, the houses are huge, but the trees are even bigger, and it makes everything feel small, and you feel cozy. Rhythm. This is about the repetition in the landscape, creating a particular flow that feels appropriate. Now, the rhythm in this one is created with hardscape. So it's almost like this is a musical that you walk through. You can feel the rhythm of walking through this garden, and it has a curve to it. So you're walking on the pathway here, going dung, 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 and it curves left and right, meandering through these plants that create a cohesive flow. There's a ground cover in between, looks like some type of little aster, that fills in and allows for kind of a unity between this kind of rhythm. One of the big things about rhythm is repetition and flow, but also having some variation. So the outside of this path is highly varied, but this path itself is the rhythm, the repetition. This is pleasing to the eye because it's easy to interpret, because it's something predictable. So our brains want to constantly predict everything. Everything is a pattern or a process. So we identified the pattern, and then the process would be, something different. Okay. I like this one a lot. The rhythm here is quite fun because there's a walkway with planters in between. The plants might be similar in size and texture, different in color, and actually different species. The thing about this is that the rhythm is consistent, mostly. Now, I think it's really interesting that they have this one patched up, so there's nothing in there. The rhythm is these planter spots here along the way. And then I like this feature in the back. Simplicity. So simplicity is an element of design that simply identifies that too much clutter and complexity can be overwhelming to the senses and might look kind of gaudy. Simple, calm, and orderly sometimes is appropriate and helps us understand the space and feel more tranquil in it, as opposed to a huge plethora of dynamic, shapes and colors. And simplicity and the balance between simplicity and contrast are important. So this image, I mean, I'm not a fan of it in particularly, but it does identify the idea of simplicity in that they've created these little curves with the grass. So this is potentially a walkway. It's a very tidy garden. This is not a garden I would personally select for, but it's a good example of simplicity. It has this consistent kind of bluish lilac flower on the edge as a border. So our brains can predict, okay, this is the border of what the garden is, so I can walk on the outside of that. And then there's some, varying plant material in between. This is an interesting one. This is the next principle or component of design is focalization. It's important to have like a specimen plant or a focal point or something in the middle to tie everything together. So if you have a landscape, in this example, the focal point would be this circle. What is this thing? This is unusual. And to me, it's an art piece. This is not like, for botanical inquiry. This thing in the middle is simply an art piece to be like, wow, okay, strange. It pulls you in towards the center. The focal point could be a water feature. Often it will be a water feature. It could be a really interesting plant. In Hawaii, there's some fascinating tropical plants that are beautiful specimen plants because of their bark or their flowers, and you put that in the middle. Yeah, Remy, you love a water feature. I know Sassy Frog said that once. Water feature should be in every garden. I agree. A statue with a water feature could be good. Maybe a space that you can gather and have performances that is a temporal kind of focal point in which you have to have people there to create that focal point. And so here, this pulls everyone in. These grounds are potentially a castle, like HC said. spread, and they all kind of connect here. And then contrast. So contrast is an interesting one in that it's understanding the colors and textures and shapes of everything and properly weighing those together so that it is visually stimulating while not being too redundant. So understanding simplicity, but also understanding contrast. Differences in color and texture add interest and excitement. So I like this example. I went through a lot of photos trying to find some of these good ones. I like the contrast between the small rocks and the big rocks. The contrast in the plant material. So I mean, these are flowering right now, and then some of them are not. So we have a lot of kind of bluish gray hues, which go well together because it unifies the garden and the landscape. But there's appropriate contrast in this kind of pea gravel, and then these rock walls, and then these purples, and then darker greens and light greens, such that it's interesting. I do like the rocks in this garden a lot too. They're really big, and you can see them poking out. Seeing this rock right here makes it feel like, okay, there's a lot of little things around this garden I don't know yet, and I have yet to see. So if I see this one here, maybe there's more surprises around the corner. I do like these trees. I do like how they put a bench here. So the bench is also like a piece of contrast. This is a very pretty one. I do like this a lot. Okay, and then unity. So I like this picture, and I like this landscape. It is kind of flowing and chaotic and full, and maybe it's too much, but for me, it feels right. There's a focal point, so this bench and this little vase, maybe it's a water feature. This is a focal point. It has repetition, so it has these repeating sections in here. It has balance in that if we were to take the fulcrum of this being the center here, it is balanced left and right. And it seems like the only way that one would be able to observe this garden from this photo is from these little paths here. It has contrast in that there's these kind of pinkish flowers, and then these kind of gray, green, and then dark green. And then there's big, like fine textures of grass flowers, and then smooth textures of succulents. The scale of this photo is very interesting. I do think it's quite small. These are all small plants. So, this chair is human-sized. The scale does seem odd. But this vase is probably up to here on me, And the unity is the last component here. Unity is that it has to feel cohesive and appropriate. And it has to be also, in my opinion, culturally appropriate for the area. Sometimes I'll see palm trees with pine trees with cacti and succulents, and it feels a little bit weird. And in certain cities and places, it makes sense because those are all endemic and indigenous to the area. And in other places, it feels weird. It feels weird to see palm trees next to pine trees next to succulents and cacti. And so having a landscape that feels united and cohesive through appropriate repetition and rhythm is important. And so the colors spread throughout. One thing to note is like these kind of pale pink flowers are here, and then down there and up here. If they were only on one side, it would feel a little out of place and it wouldn't feel fully united. Okay, that was the first one. The next component of sustainable landscape design is soil amendment. Now, this presentation will be focused on Austin, Texas, and a little bit on the broader United States, but you can take all the examples here and apply them to your own neck of the woods. So Austin, Texas is an interesting city in Texas that borders two distinct soil types. On the left here, on the west side, is the soil called the Edwards Plateau. It's an ecoregion. And on the right is the Blackland Prairie that has a post-oak savanna. The soils are very different. So if you're in Austin, Texas, and you say, hey, I want to grow these plants, or I want to grow these things, well, you need to know which side of Austin you're on, because that's a huge difference. This is what the soil in the Edwards Plateau looks like. Rocky, very rich in calcium carbonate, so we call it calcareous. There's not a lot of organic matter or topsoil. It's not great soil, honestly. And then the other side is very fertile. It's called the Blackland Prairie, and this is the state soil of Texas here. This is extremely rich mollisol, soil created by grasslands. And there's a great resource called the WebSoilSurvey. And what you do is you can go and collect an area of interest and get a soil map and then kind of pin the area that you want to see the soil on. It'll tell you information about that soil. This is a Zilker Botanical Garden in downtown Austin, Texas, and it has divided it into a few distinct types of soils. And then it gives you information on those soils, including how much soil you have until you hit bedrock. Now, people who play Minecraft, bedrock, you can't go beyond it. In landscaping, you want to have appropriately rich, robust soil, and once you hit bedrock, you're going to have to get a jackhammer. It's not worth it to try and break that. But if you look at this garden, it's on a hill. So the top of the hill you only have 20 centimeters until you hit the bedrock. At the bottom of the hill, you have like 200. Isn't that crazy? So if they were trying to build something in this garden, then they would have to understand how much soil they have. Soil can be broken up into a lot of different things, and we can describe it in a lot of ways. We can describe a soil by its particle sizes. So it can be gravelly, where it's bigger than 2 millimeters in diameter, a coarse sand, a fine sand, a silt, which is really small, and a clay, which is the smallest. And clays are so tiny that they stick together, and then they become what you know as like molding or clay that you make pots and pans out of. I mean, people don't make pans out of them, but pots, I guess. So, clay is a big one to note because it is the tiniest particle size. And so you can also look at the amount of clay in different soils too. It'll inform you of the soil texture. So soil textures is this component of soil related to its like porosity, and it has 3 components. There's sand on this bottom side, clay on the left side, and silt on the right side. And these are percentages. So if you have like 50% clay and 30% silt and then 20% sand, then the whole overall component is clay. And so the effect of clay particles in the soil is pretty big. As you see this diagram, the majority of it is here by clay. If you had to choose one to say that's the best for plants in general, loam might be the best in general for most plants. Certain plants are well adapted and only survive in certain types of soils. So, if you choose native plants, then they'll thrive in the native soils. Okay. Another thing to note is that there's a pH. The soil has a pH, which is the amount of hydrogens. We consider ideal soil pH around 6, 5.5 to 7. So neutral is 7, and as you get closer to 0, that's acidic. And if you go from 7 to 14, that's called alkaline. And so there's alkaline soils are what are native to Austin, Texas. The thing about the soil is that the soil pH affects which nutrients can be uptaken. The soil pH affects which nutrients can be uptaken, and so if you look over here at 6.0 acidity, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium can be uptaken really heavily. The thickness of each of these bars is how easily the plant can absorb it. And then the thin, if it's thin, it doesn't have an easy time absorbing it. So if you get to really acidic over here at like 4, the plant can't really absorb the nutrients of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium very easily. But it can get iron. Iron is really common in acidic soils, and often acidic soils are red. If you look at the alkaline soil profile, over at 9, it has a hard time collecting iron, hard time getting nitrogen. And so certain plants are adapted to certain soils, but in general, if we're gardening, we would want something around 6. So for example, in Austin, we would describe the soil as gravelly clay loam that is very permeable. It's alkaline, so it's a basic soil. It's calcareous. It's from limestone. And the west side of Austin doesn't have a lot of soil. And then the right side of Austin actually shrinks and swells. It is that type of clay you see in the Western movies. It goes, where there's cracks in it. It's a very rare soil. And it's, it's not common, but when it dries out, it can alter foundations. Not great for gardening. So what we want to do when we're doing landscaping is we want to create pockets of healthy soil. So they're little islands of good soil. So we would add compost and put cover crops down. You have to reduce the pH if it's alkaline soil. Adding organic matter helps with water retention. If you have time, grow cover crops for a season or two, and then add compost into it. Additionally, if you're on a hill, you can also terrace. So you've seen like the rice gardens in Korea and China. Those are all terraced paddies, like rice paddies. If you're creating really healthy soil and it rains, it's going to wash away. So then you might as well have to terrace it if you're on any hill. Cover crops. So the example in Austin, Texas is in the winter grow fava beans, wheat, or any brassica. And what happens with cover crops is these are just plants you put in the soil, and their interactions with the roots and the microorganisms in the soil then help create a robust ecosystem. And then once the cover crops die, the nutrients in the plant material then gets reincorporated into the soil. This method that is used often is called chop and drop. So you grow it, and then once it gets to a certain stage, you cut it, and then you let it fall, and that's organic mulch. Or it's just the plant material naturally decomposes on top. There's organizations across the world that have resources for your area. In Austin, one of the best ones is the Austin Organic Gardeners. There's also different organizations like Agricultural Extension that will be able to help if you're in the United States. Compost. One of the things about compost is that what you want to do is in the spring and in the fall, add like 2 to 4 inches of compost onto the area that you want to be planting in, and then scratch it in using like a stone rake. It has kind of harder teeth, so you just throw it down the area you want. And as long as it's flat, or if it's terraced, then scratch it in so it gets incorporated into that soil. I would do the best to get it, maybe 8 inches, but that's pretty deep. If you can't do that, that's fine too. The pickle is under 2 to 4 inches of compost. If you're doing potting, if you're doing raised beds, there's often companies that sell media for raised beds. I once used 100% compost, and it was a fascinating situation, and the plants got kind of sick. So you have to select, if you're creating raised beds, then get media for raised beds. Okay, number 3, efficient irrigation. You want to make sure that you water efficiently, and the best way to be most efficient and water conserving is to do it by hand, because no one wants to sit out there for a long time and water by hand, and nothing gets wasted unless you're kind of flippant about it. But hand watering is so time consuming that we just we don't want to do that. But what if you go on vacation? Then they're not getting watered. So the next thing is drip. That's right, Salty Boy. Drip irrigation. That's our go-to. Here is a landscape that shows the irrigation of drip. What happens is you put these little tubes out, and they have little holes on the underside of them. You turn it on, and they drip water into the soil. Now you can see here, they haven't planted it all the way, so then you can see where the water has dispersed. Drip irrigation is best when you put it where the roots are. So if you just put it where the plant is in general, it might not be best. Now the roots will grow towards the moisture, but you want to make sure it has access to it. Once you plant it, when you put it in the ground, it's going to be pretty vulnerable because it's undergoing shock from being transplanted, and it might be in a new environment, new light conditions, and new stress. So watering it is important. Hand watering upon planting is a viable option if you can't get it to drip right at the roots. Now this will get you right to the roots. This is a little prong. It's a little stake with an emitter on the end that drips. You can stick that right on, the roots. Now these people have pots of different, it looks like solanaceous crop. This is how they're gardening, and this is very good. If you're going to use sprinklers, use large droplets that go low to the ground. If you have one that is a mist or shoots into the air, you're wasting water because that mist evaporates, and then the water that's shooting straight into the air, will also evaporate too. So large droplets low to the ground is the way to go if you're using these. There's also appropriately efficient emitter heads that are like low water use. Here's a diagram that kind of summarizes everything. They have the irrigation coming from the building. It goes through the garden bed. This little pipe has holes in the bottom, so it drips water into the roots. They have these things called micro emitters or micro sprayers that spray the lawn. And then at the very end here, They have a emitter tube that drops into there, and then if they have a pot, they can, stick this little piece in and stake that into the pot. With the tree, they have this little ring that is an emitter or drip line around the. It's supposed to be around the drip line of the tree where the roots are. So, yeah. Number 4, my favorite one, is about the plants. Appropriate plant and zone selection. You got to make sure you have the right plants. If not, it's not going to be. It's not going to last for a long time. In the United States, we have these things called USDA hardiness zones. If you go on Instagram and Twitter, you'll see people who are really into gardening say, "Oh, I'm zone, 7A," and what that means is each of these zones, 10 to 3, I think it might go to 2 in like Alaska, is the average extreme minimum temperature per year. So it's like basically how bad will a freeze be? That doesn't account for everything else, but it's a good starting point. The thing is like, Florida, 10, that's like tropical, and then, you have some tropical stuff in Texas and California, and then it's like freezing cold. Here's an example so we can see everything. This is Southern California. The average annual extreme minimum temperature is what it is. Now, in Los Angeles, you can grow so many good stuff. Is anyone in, like, I'm envious of people who are in, like, 10B, 10A. This means that it most likely won't freeze, so you can grow a lot of really interesting, diverse plants. Now, up here in the mountains, it's 5A, which means it gets to like -20. So in the mountains here, it's going to be freezing. And then you go along the coast into the chaparral and wetlands of Los Angeles, and you see that it's like, 10B, which means it might get to like 35, will be your extreme. And there's even a little tiny pocket here it looks like 11A, which is truly tropical. It won't get below 40. But yeah, so if you're into succulent growing, this is LA, SoCal's a great place to do it. And you can see as you get into the desert, it can get colder. But these are important to identify. Here's Texas for reference. It's it gets colder than California. But the big thing about it is that that's not the whole story. It misses a lot of other things. It only tells you about how cold it gets. It doesn't tell you about the soil, doesn't tell you about the region, doesn't tell you about the, environment, the other climate factors. Another very useful thing to consider is the ecoregion. There's different tiers of ecological region, but the big thing about ecoregion is it's a specific type of landscape where the soil and the plants and climate are generally the same. And so if you look over here at Texas, I was talking about Austin, Texas, it's on the border between 30 and 32, right in the little saddle right there. You go over to 13, this is the Great Basin Desert, The 13 is this big desert. It's all very similar. I mean, plants can vary between, and there's gradients, and there's things called ecotone, which is the gradient between the ecoregions. This is the level 3 ecoregion, which is the one I would recommend looking at. You can also go to level 4, which breaks it into smaller sections, but this gives you the gist. 24 is the Chihuahuan Desert, so this is the state of Chihuahua and, West Texas and New Mexico. You look at here, California, number 6. This is like the oak, chaparral, all the way from LA up into like San Francisco. And so evaluating and putting plants from your ecoregion is going to be critical. Now, if we go back and look at Austin, it has 2 distinct sections, 2 distinct ecoregions with the post-oak savanna that I kind of group into Blackland Prairie. But if you go around Austin, you'll never see a pine tree. And if you see it, it won't look good. It'll look sickly and green. And so why don't you see pine trees in Austin? Well, the soil isn't right. And so the ecoregion accounts often for soil and climate. And it's too alkaline or too basic. It's not acidic enough for these guys to grow. When in doubt, choose plants native to your ecoregion. So in Austin, Texas, Ilex vomitoria and Leucophyllum fructescens are 2 plants that grow really well in the native soils that are sometimes hard to grow other plants. And if you want to grow pollinators, there's always going to be plenty of host plants for butterflies. I gave this presentation once to a garden club, specifically wanted me to talk about sustainable pollinator garden plants. And so this is an Aristolochia. This little plant is a host plant to a swallowtail. This one right here. And then this is a passion flower, Passiflora incarnata, which is the host to this Gulf fritillary. So there will likely be plants you can put that the butterflies will lay their eggs on, and you can then cultivate a community of a specific population. Most regions will have a book that you can find or some resource material. In Austin, the city has funded a booklet that describes landscape plants that are native and really well adapted. This is also in part by the extension departments in the United States. There's always going to be a university that has a land grant establishment where they will have a component called extension. And extension is basically like the person's job is to go take the current research from the professors and get that knowledge distributed to the people and the farmers and the homeowners and the people who are, living in the land and doing the agricultural and landscape work. And so extension offices are a great way to get resources for practical science-based knowledge. These are some examples of what, someone might want to grow in Austin, Texas. The, cedar sage, purple coneflower. This one grows throughout most of the United States, actually. These are some trees that are really popular. Oaks. I love an oak. I love an elm. Red cherry. This one's kind of rare. Arizona cypress is an example of a well-adapted species. So Arizona cypress is not from Texas, but it is from Arizona. It grows really well in Austin, and it's not invasive. Additionally, people who want to grow vegetables, I would recommend checking out your local extension office if you're in the United States. In Texas, Texas A&M is the extension university. If you're in California, it's University of California, and there'll be at Davis and Berkeley and Riverside. They will have resources for vegetable planting and fruit planting and all these different things. So if you're in SoCal, Riverside might be your place to look at for citrus and stuff. But okay, number 5, mulch. This is the best one. I love mulch. We need the mulch fairy. Bring the mulch fairy in here. The little baby dog thing.
What's the benefit of mulch?
You'll attract mulch fairies. You'll keep the plants insulated. Sometimes the soil needs to stay at a certain temperature. In Texas, if it gets too cold, some of the plants can die, their roots. The mulch helps maintain the moisture of the soil. It prevents soil crusting. So if the soil is exposed to the air and it gets real hot, they'll dry and form a crust that is kind of infertile, and there's no, life going on in that little section. And it's hard for water to get in there, actually, because it dries out and forms like a nasty little thing. If you have mulch, it also minimizes the weed growth, and eventually it'll break down and add organic matter back to the soil. And organic matter is really important for soil retention and for pH and for nutrient cycling. And so if you use organic mulch made of pecans or wood chips or, pine needles, those will break down, and fungi and bacteria will form this kind of very thin layer, underneath the mulch that looks white. That is the breaking down back into organic matter. Yeah, this is what we had at Zilker. Pecan shells, very Texan. Yeah, the local pecan farm gave us these. Okay, number 6, limited turf area. Now look at this yard. I think this is an appropriate yard for a home, If you have like kids and dogs and, you want to have some grass to like sit on and have a picnic and, roll around or something, then this is nice, because on the right side, you can like walk in. There's plants to create a natural border. So it feels kind of sheltered, like there's a little natural fence. There's some rocks here that help create a strong edge, so it feels defined. There's a tree. It's a very cute enclosed vibe. I agree, Ethan. Yeah. It has a really tall kind of back space here. So, it fills in the kind of unpleasant foundation that's here. Really, really a good example of limiting turf area. Now, people might still want it. I understand. That's perfectly fine. It's not bad. But if it's all turf, that's kind of wretched. That's not sustainable, first of all. If you're going to choose turf, choose something that can at least tolerate drier conditions. Like in Texas, there's recommendations from the extension office, like buffalo grass and blue grama. They have different textures, and they have different heights. You choose one that would work for your needs. There's also often resources available, so buffalo grass or a Bermuda grass hybrid that doesn't make seeds and spread. Bermuda grass is a wretched thing. It is super invasive, but it's so wretched that you can't kill it in your lawn. If you're interested in lawns, then that's a good one. Just choose one that doesn't make seeds, so it doesn't spread into wild spaces. And the last one, this is the big one. This is also the most hand-wavy one. This is the one that's like, hey, if you want to have a sustainable landscape, reduce inputs and maintenance. This one is often appealing to people. If you try and sell a sustainable landscape to someone, you can say, well, it'll save you money and time and energy because you don't have to be buying pesticides or fertilizers or herbicides. You don't have to be mowing the lawn every single week. It's cheaper in the long run because the stuff's adapted for your area and doesn't need to be watered all the time. So the first thing is minimize pesticides. So if you want to have a natural landscape that has native plants and is attracting, the appropriate wildlife to help create a dynamic system, you don't want to kill the good things. An example is like for people who have citrus trees, there is a negative pest that's this little like white-looking insect that comes and sucks the sugars out of the leaf. But there's a beneficial wasp that will kill the pest. So if you spray a pesticide, you'll kill the beneficial wasp and the pest, but then everything is dead. What we want to do is something called integrative pest management, where we acknowledge the natural systems of animals and plants and their interactions and the ecological roles at play, and take advantage of those. So if you have a rat problem, attracting owls could be good because the owls will eat the rats. And the owls are our friends. We always want to start with the most naturally occurring solution and the least harmful first. So, starting with something that is like putting vinegar on the pest or on the weed to kill it. And if that doesn't work, then working your way up to a more intense systemic herbicide or something. So always choose a thing that's the least harmful and give it a go and work your way up. Don't start with a nuclear bomb. Another thing is you want to reduce soil compaction when you have this like reduced inputs. The one on the left here, this person bought this thing called weed cloth. Or weed fabric. Often you'll see it in nurseries. People put it down because it keeps the weeds out. But what it does is it creates like a dead soil and it compacts the soil and it smushes the soil. It is less fertile and it's not very healthy. The water going in isn't very high. This is killing the soil. And then the plants growing in here, they're having to deal with that. You're buying like plastic to put in your yard. Or put a cover crop. This is some type of legume. This little legume creates this cover crop. It puts nitrogen back into the soil. It aerates the soil because the roots go into the soil. And when the roots die, they leave, and there's a little gap in there. This helps for water flow into the soil. And now this tree is benefiting from all these things. Now, you don't want the plant like growing up and around the tree too much and choking it, but this on the right is a low input. You basically throw the seeds down and maybe water a little bit, it'll grow. One of the things here is that to have reduced inputs and maintenance, you want to cultivate a vibrant microbiome for nutrient cycling. In this example, the one on the left, you're not creating a vibrant microbiome. Everything's kind of dead. This is like, in my opinion, suburban America. Everything is like, okay, spray the thing to kill the thing so that it looks clean, but then there's only like 2 things alive. On the right, this is a more dynamic, exciting experience where there's, habitat for things, and by creating increased habitat for animals, you're increasing the potential for beneficial effects, including in the soil. And so if you have plants, then they're putting organic matter back into the soil, and then those are breaking down, and then microbes are breaking those down, and then creating nutrients for the plants, and then the cycle continues. Now, if you start throwing in your own nutrients, then the bacteria are like, actually, you don't need me here to do this. The plant isn't helping me grow because it doesn't need the nitrogen. And so something outside, which would be the human, is putting nitrogen into the system. And so then you have less microbes. Then you stop throwing in the nitrogen fertilizer and there's no microbes. But if you can create a healthy balance, the microbes will create the nutrients that the plants need, and you don't have to be buying Miracle-Gro. Some of the things that are really worth noting is that legumes, a lot of them fix nitrogen. So the one on the left, this is the root of a legume. It has these little sections that are kind of closed off. Oxygen cannot get inside, and there's little bacteria that create nitrogen called rhizobia, and they give those to the plants, and the plants give them food and sugars to keep them alive, and then that can be dispersed back into the soil. Some natural sources of nitrogen include feather meal and poultry manure, and if you have access to fish, that's quite good, but it's stinky. Another thing that's really important for sustainable landscapes is habitat. Making places for animals to live. The more animals you have, the better your system will be. It'll have more connections in the web of life. And so dead trees, if you have an HOA, they'll be like, get rid of that dead tree. That's nasty little eyesore. This is a home to hundreds of things. Birds will live in them, insects will live in them, bees will live in them, solitary bees in certain areas will live in them. And so a dead tree like this, or a snag, is really important habitat. Fungi will break it down and get those nutrients back into the soil. Often a sustainable landscape might look unruly. It might look chaotic. It might look, like a mess. It might look like no one's giving a shit about it. But the thing is that it is the natural order of that system. And so it is intentional that we might leave a tree. And maybe put an interpretive sign next to it so people know that you're not just lazy. And it's an intentional choice, that it's a home. I'll show you a picture of what a sustainable garden looks like. And it's this one, the one we started with. Now, it has so many plants, it's so diverse, it has so many colors and shapes and sizes. This is what it looks like. Now, you say, well, that's pretty. It doesn't look as colorful and showy as some of the ones we saw at the very beginning. But this garden is here in Austin, Texas. It has so many different plants. The small ones are along the path. The bigger ones are in the back. So it has this effect where you can look up and see things. It is buzzing. It is buzzing with life. It's called the Green Garden because it's sustainably conscious. It is environmentally appropriate. It has native and well-adapted species. It has plants from Mexico that survive. It has asymmetrical design, yes. So the balance in it, the entry of this, look at, exactly, really good point, Soul Toaster. You walk in and there's two big trees here and then one here, but then it's not fully balanced, but the shrubs on the right do help fill the space to make it feel like it's an equilibrium. Then you walk through and then your whole perspective changes and then you get more different perspectives. So this garden is a really good example of what a Texas sustainable landscape looks like. There's so many animals in this garden, it's beautiful. And it is also, because it is native to the area, it follows the native cycles of the seasons. In the winter, it changes drastically. And there's certain beauty to change in cycles. Everything is a pattern and a process. And so the pattern and process of a sustainable garden is that it will have notable seasons. Now in Texas, I think there's like 3 seasons. In California, there's like 2. You have wet and dry. And so, you will get to experience those seasons of the indigenous seasons to your area with an appropriate sustainable landscape. So this is what we should define as the new definition of what something beautiful is, People say this, well, this looks so wild. This is really better for the environment than the green lawn and the manicured topiaries.